morning, everyone. Oh, can you hear me? Yes. So I am Lian Alampay. I'm the chair of the Department of Psychology, and I officially welcome you to this lecture by Dr. Tes Tuason, entitled, "I Can Honor the Past, but I Do Not Need to Live in It, Healing from Intergenerational Trauma." So we are being live streamed at the YouTube channel of the Ateneo de Manila University, and also at the Facebook page of the Clinical Psychology Division of the Psychological Association of the Philippines. So welcome everyone who are here on site at the Ateneo. Welcome also to everyone who is online and viewing us in YouTube or in Facebook. Later, we will set aside time, Dr. Tuason will set aside time for an open forum, a Q&A. So if at any point during the talk you have burning questions or comments that you'd like Dr. Tes to address, please do post them in Facebook. In the comments, we will collate those questions so that she could address them at the end of the talk or before the end of her session. Okay? So let me introduce. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Tes Tuason. So Dr. Tes Tuason is professor and program director of the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program at the University of North Florida. Tes was born and raised in the Philippines, where she learned resilience of spirit, generosity of heart, and using one's personal power for transformative teaching and research. She is currently a Fulbright US Scholar Awardee. She's spending it in St. Louis University in Baguio City. Tes has received several awards, specifically in teaching, counseling graduate students, and in advocating for the marginalized. For instance, the Dean's Leadership Council Faculty Fellowship, the Outstanding International Leadership Award, the Susan B. Anthony Award, the Outstanding Faculty Scholarship Award, and 2 Outstanding Graduate Teaching Awards at UNF. Her research interests have focused on economic inequality and investigating poverty's determinants, minority identity formation, family, child, and adolescent issues utilizing systems perspectives, and the impact of COVID on psychological well-being across cultures. She has over 50 publications and over 100 conference presentations. Additionally, she advocates for mental health in research collaborations with community agencies and has received 2 UNF Foundation board grants and the Spiritual Competency in Mental Health grant from the John Templeton Foundation through the University of South Alabama. This is such an impressive bio note. But more personally, Tes is a close friend of the Ateneo and the Department of Psychology. We know her as one of the mentees of our founder, Father Jaime Bulatao. And we are so pleased that she came home and despite her very busy schedule, found the time to share her knowledge and expertise on intergenerational trauma with us. So without further ado, let us welcome Dr. Tes Tuason.
Thank you. Salamat. It's so wonderful to hear my name pronounced correctly. Because in the US they say Tuason or Tucson, like Tucson, Arizona. So I said, Tes Tuason. I said, oh wow. Thank you. It's very, I feel it's like a homecoming to be here. I was in your shoes many years ago. I graduated via psychology in 1988 here at the Ateneo, and then also did my master's in child and family psychology also here in 2000. No, sorry, cannot be. 1992, and then I left to do my PhD in 1995. And it's nice to see your very excited faces and very willing to learn today. And I hope I could share with you. This is, I was saying also, it's like a homecoming, very much in terms of like giving back and truly reconnecting and actually enjoying the sweetness of life, right? I see my student, my former student and advisee, very good friends who are here. So thank you very much. It's like in the airplane, you know. I know you have a lot of choices for the things that you need to do, that you want to do with your time. So I am grateful that you're spending your Saturday morning with me. Okay, thank you. All right. So I wanted, the title of this talk is I Can Honor the Past, but I Do Not Need to Live in It. It's actually a quote from one of my clients. And one of my clients who had a hard time, really had a hard time letting go of the past, but more so had a hard time letting go of the symptoms that she learned in terms of coping. She was so used to having a very hard life. And it's almost like taking it away from her with being happy or healing is, it's like, it's very much uprooting, right? And so she had an ex-husband who was narcissistic, a gaslighter, who was very manipulative and combative, very aggressive towards her. But she couldn't let go. She couldn't separate, right, for a long time. And then her father was her, in a sense, her resilience pillar, but then the mother was also very distant. But so she was almost like she held on to it, knowing that this is how life is. Life is just full of suffering for me. But the most painful thing is, to spite her, her ex-husband killed himself in her place of work. Just really to do that. And so it was such trauma and such difficulty, even in terms of seeing how it is to break free from that, right? And this is her breakthrough quote that I say, oh my gosh, yeah, I can honor the past, because she needed to know, or she needed to feel that her way of coping was hers, but to have compassion over that, to be able to let go, right? So I can honor the past, but I do not need to live in it. I can let go of it. But of course, as we know, letting go is one big thing, monumental, but it's actually more the many little letting goes, right? Every day that we need to deal with. Okay, so I'm going to talk about intergenerational trauma, because if we see our generation, we think, okay, only of our parents, but then we also look into the parents of our parents, and then we also look into our community and the trauma there. And the exciting thing, of course, that's not exciting, it's sad, right? But the exciting thing about this, I thought, is we have about like 2 hours or less than 2 hours, but I'm going to switch after a while and then talk about treatment, but actually do treatment, like practice treatment, because these are really the ways by which we would be able to heal from trauma, is to keep doing it. I know, sorry. Okay, and so I know we said about the questions, right? So we'll just leave perhaps 15 minutes later on after the talk, and then we'll perhaps have a 5-minute break in the middle, because you might be falling asleep. All right, okay. So we will start. Thank you. Do I need the microphone? Yes, no? Okay, all right. Perhaps I'll just get it like I'm dancing. Or singing, sorry, not dancing. I don't need the microphone to dance. Oops, all right. See, I told you dancing. Okay, so just our outline for today. We're going to talk about what is trauma, which most of you would know, but I think I would talk about also the neurobiological legacy of trauma. Why is it so very difficult, right? Why is it so very difficult to process? Why is it difficult to let go? Why is it so difficult to heal, right? And that is because of how it's encoded, right? So we talk about trauma, we talk about IT, or intergenerational trauma. what it is, and those most usually we have the three, in a sense, kinds. We have historical trauma, the thing that happened in the past. We have cultural ongoing trauma that's shared by it's shared trauma by a group of people, and sometimes it started in the past, but then it's ongoing, right? Like in the U.S., for example, the most discriminated group is LGBTQ+, right? And it's ongoing, okay? I don't know how much the extent is here, but I'm guessing. I don't know, but I see in the streets, I'm guessing it's there, but at the same time, there's a little bit more of the openness, or a little bit more of the acceptance, perhaps, or tolerance. Well, we'll see, okay? And then we have I think the one that's most relevant, if I might say, or the one that you can identify most with is your family, intergenerational trauma, because we all have families, whether we like them or not, right? Okay. And then we talk about a little bit about how intergenerational trauma is transmitted from one generation to another, and how is it that the trauma that we are experiencing is then passed on to our descendants, right? And then what are the consequences of intergenerational trauma that's personal, that's familial, and then our community, and then even in our nation and in our world, right? But I will do this in a sense that we would be able to identify with it, and it's not abstract, right? And then we talk about, and this is the exciting part, how is intergenerational trauma treated, right? And you can see, I think you're familiar with some of these, but I'm going to work on, or in a sense, identify them, and then practice it in our daily lives, even if it's just helpful for 1% of the time. 1% plus 1% plus 1%, we're getting there, right? So it's called somatic or sensory therapy, internal family systems, narrative therapy, I think this you know, and then this I think is the most important. Or at least it's the one that's most accessible, but also most effective, is spiritual and indigenous healing. Because the trauma happened, if the trauma happens here, then there are elements or resources within that would help with healing. And that we would need to unearth, because those are the ones that are more natural. They're organic. And because of that, they're also most powerful, right? Then you have DBT, which you may know, dialectical behavioral therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, play therapy, or play, right? And theraplay, therapeutic play. So I think perhaps after the talk, we're going to stand up and then dance and do some things. But just to be able to get used to, right? Get used to that realm of being safe within us, safe in our environments, okay? I think I wanted to just point out too, especially with trauma, there is, we call it a negativity bias. Our brains, our memories, what we share or what we remember are mostly negative, because we remember, and that's backed up by research, we really attend to it and remember the negative things 3 times faster than the positive ones. And so with this part, that's why it's very important. That's why it's very important that we need to be intentional about seeking the positive, about seeking the healing, about being happy, about what Father Bill McGarry would say, about finding delight, right, in yourself, okay? And so there. Okay, and then of course Father Wu would say being the creative, like be creative, and like no, it's if in terms of like happiness or being healthy has no borders, right? In terms of it being limitless. All right, so that's our agenda for today. Okay. All right. So the most important of all too is like having a trauma lens. That's why I say that understand the scope, especially for even with your friends, but especially with clients or even family, to be able to understand trauma and the possibility of trauma or where it's coming from, right? Diba, I'll say this in Tagalog, but diba, sometimes when we have friends or people that we love who are having a hard time or are giving us a hard time, I think the compassionate or understanding thing we say is, may pinagdadaanan siya. I think that is a very, very good example of having a trauma lens. Because we're already giving compassion, we're already giving curiosity as opposed to judgment. Sometimes, may pinagdadaan. Well, it can be judgmental, but you know what I mean, right? But giving already that allowance. Because this is very important, because of course, the way, if I am a victim of trauma, the way I see the world is in that perspective. And so the compassion we give, if we are able to use this trauma lens to understand people according to the trauma that they've experienced, would then be very monumental and generous. Not just to them, but also to you, right? Yourself. Okay. So just a little bit about trauma. I think this one you know, right? What is trauma? The individual experiences subjectively, which is a threat to life, bodily integrity, or sanity. I think that is the accepted definition of trauma, where where you were scared or that you witnessed something that was a threat. Okay, this is the one that Sack-Whitney et al. In 2000 has extended in terms of the definition, where is the unique individual experience of an event, a series of events, or enduring conditions. If you think about here in the Philippines, enduring conditions of growing up with an alcoholic family, right? With an alcoholic father, or growing up in a lot of poverty, or even if you are, let's say, you are well off, growing up seeing other people having less than you, or sometimes even putting down other people to put yourself up, right? Or enduring conditions of substance abuse, addictions, drug wars, killings, massacres, oppressive traffic, right? But these are things that affect us. Or if you, or growing up with a parent who is severely mentally ill, or having a very aggressive family member, but that you need to rely on them because they're helping you financially, things like that. But enduring conditions, right? Or having to be pushed or pressured to do sex work because there's not anymore. There's no source of income, right? So this one extends trauma in terms of like the enduring conditions, and at the same time, your indication is the experience of feeling overwhelmed by it, right? That it's too much, right? It's overwhelming in terms of like the effect or the impact on me. Okay. So, and if there's anything that you can get out of this, remember yung may pinagdadaanan ako, right? Instead of viewing people and asking the question, what's wrong with you, right? What's wrong with you? If we can be more compassionate and then respond with, what has happened to you? Okay, and that's having the trauma lens. Or what is happening to you now, right? Extending that, even that question makes it already curious as opposed to judgmental, right? It gives already a lot, it opens up space already for generosity and understanding as opposed to mali, diba? Mali, or may tama ka sa ulo, diba? Or something like that, right? So it's what has happened to you, okay? So if we look at it, and this is, I think, the most, or one of the, I cannot say always the most, but one of the findings in terms of trying to understand trauma is our triune brain, right? The frontal cortex, where you have verbal language and analytical reasoning, is the one that is repressed or suppressed during trauma, because trauma happens when in childhood or even adolescence, when the brain is not yet developed. And so that part of the brain cannot function. So what happens is, you have, this is the one that's affected, you have the emotions, the impact on us, right? The limbic system. And of course, the one that sets off the limbic system is your alarm, your fire alarm, which is the amygdala. And then you have the reptilian brain, which is your arousal, more of the language, sensation, and impulses. So in trauma, this is the one that sets off, there's something wrong that's happening, right? We respond with emotions and with impulses and sensations. And the frontal cortex is the one that is inhibited. It's inhibited during threat. And the hippocampus is also inhibited during threat. Do you know what the hippocampus does? Is memory, right? That's why I always remember, because it's a campus. The campus is where you memorize things. But, so that's the one. So if you look at it, anything, let's say with trauma, so let's say if you think about sexual abuse, right? The memory, what happened is not processed, and there's no verbal language understanding. But it's encoded by what we feel. It's encoded by what you see in the environment when what's going on. Even sometimes all your senses, right, and the smell when it was happening, and so that's the one where it's encoded, and that impulse to run, to shout, to fight back, right? That's all the ones that are encoded, and that's why it's very powerful, because there's a part of the brain that's inhibited, and it couldn't function, right? And so, in a sense, if you have then that paralysis, and then it's encoded that way. So that's the neurobiological legacy of trauma. So of course, a 5-year-old cannot process it. Of course, a 3-year-old or even a 13-year-old would say it's my fault, right? Because there's none of that cognitive processing. So how do we deal with trauma? You have these 5 animal defenses. I put that animal there to remind us, right? So there's the fight, when we are aggressive, or when we are aggressive, or so this is a way of coping with trauma. When we're aggressive, or we're assertive, or we fight back, right? That is, if you think of it, what are you doing? If that's your way of coping with trauma, what is it that it's doing to your spirit in terms of helping you with trauma, right? What is it doing? When you are aggressive, if that's your way of coping with something that happened to you, so let's say, for example, I grew up in an alcoholic family, and I'm with an alcoholic father, and my coping is to fight or to be aggressive, to be angry all the time, and also even to other people later on, even if it's not with my family. What, if you look at the compassionate part of it, what is that way of coping doing to me? Sorry? It's protecting. Very good. It's protecting me. Before you hurt me, I hurt you first. It is also taking control, right? There are things that I cannot control with an alcoholic father, but this one I can. I can control my anger. So you can see the adaptive part, right? The flight is to go away, right? To go away. And so that way of coping, if you fly away, or flight, right? And what are ways of flight, of coping? Avoidance, sometimes substance use, sometimes drug use, sometimes distance, emotional distance, not being there, right? Okay, now the million-dollar question, what does that do in terms of way of coping with trauma? it takes away your problem, right? It takes away, it gives you a break. It gives you a break from the grief or from dealing with the problem. Okay, very good. Freeze. How do we freeze in our lives in terms of coping? Perhaps in terms of career, perhaps settling in terms of like relationships or with our partner or even with our work, or even not doing our, in terms of like daily living, just staying home, not doing anything, right? So what does that do? To save energy, right? I'm saving my energy, yes. So again, if you can see, it's also it's also self-soothing. It's also self-protective, right? Okay. And then when we submit, sige na lang, like that. Resignation. What is submit? There's an animal, shucks, I forgot what it's called. You might be able to help me. That pretends that they're dead. A possum, thank you. Yes, right? And so that's submitting. It's like that, more like that resignation. Again, what does that do? We can see, right? What it does, it also gives an excuse to not do anything about your problem. So a little bit of the flight too. All right. And then when we attach is we attach to other people. We depend on other people, we ask other people, we stay in a very painful relationship even if it's not good for us, we attach. And what does attaching do? There's companionship, right? There is company. It takes us away from being alone or loneliness, all right? So, I wanted to do that shift because we just see the coping. But the coping, especially for where there's no processing, where there's no cognitive, the frontal cortex, right? Because they have reason. All these ways of coping have reason. It was needed at the time of the trauma. But the only thing is that we attach ourselves to it and we think that it is us. That's us. It becomes part of us, right? And so they become parts of us, and so it's good to know where it came from, but also good to know to have compassion over it. It was needed at that time. When we couldn't process, it was needed at that time. Our mistake as adults, or when we grow up, is we attach ourselves to it as if our self-worth is tied to our way of coping. And we feel sometimes that's the only way to cope. Mm-hmm. And so when you take it away, if you take that coping away, it feels like, oh, my worth as a person is less. Because if my control is less, my soothing or protecting myself becomes less, right? Because of that's how it's tied. All right. So to just keep that in mind when we talk about the healing later on, right? Because then we know, okay, so if these are ways of coping and to have compassion over them, what would we need to do in terms of healing? Okay? So the legacy of trauma resides in the body. Remember, we were not able to process it, and so it resides in our emotions, it resides in our impulses, it resides in the body, right? So even physically, right? But they are without words, okay? So if you think of, so here, that's why it's how we react, right? It's how the things that are happening in our body, we carry those, and we react to trauma that way, okay? All right, so here's Deirdre Fay in 2002 talks about parallel lines, and this is how trauma works, right? So here's your here and now, and something just ordinary happens. You smell something, that reminds you of something, right? Or you see something, or sometimes it's the time of day, or the season of the year, or the month of the year, in terms like anniversary things. Very, very benign, just ordinary. But what happens is because of what we encoded in our bodies, in their senses, in our impulses, we are brought back to the there and then when the trauma happened. And then those emotions, sensations, impulses, ways of coping, all of that, the fear, the trauma, the anger, the shame, the embarrassment, all of that then comes back to the now, as if it just happened. So these are the parallel lines, and they happen so sometimes very instantly, right? Because there's no cognitive processing. So it happens very instantly. And then we experience the danger in the now. And that's when we are triggered, right? That's why we are triggered by the trauma. Okay. So here are ways by which we encode, and the ways by which we are triggered, right? So sometimes they come out. So Fisher in 2015 outlined all of these. So they come out as intrusive emotions, the anger, the shame, the fear, and they just happen. Sometimes your clients would just say, it's just there. It's always just there, or I just feel it, right? That's the intrusive part of it. Or their thoughts. I'm not good enough, or baliwala lang ako, or hindi naman ako pwedeng maging masaya, I couldn't be happy, or I don't deserve to be happy, or this is how I will be, or I cannot take it, right? So these are intrusive thoughts, right? And so you can have them. Sometimes they're contradictory or nominative. And then you have bodily sensations, dizziness, just seeing on one eye, not having peripheral vision, or something that's just that noise or that ringing tone, but it's experienced in the body. Okay, certain of that sensations. Floating, loss of hearing, numbness, dedma, or feeling very heavy, but it's experienced, right? So that's, and then it becomes intrusive. It's like it's always just there, or it happens at times that you don't expect. Okay, and then you have impulses to run, to eat, to hide, to not go out, to stay away, or sometimes the impulses to shout, to yell, however way, and then it's again intrusive that way, right? So this is how it's encoded. And then you have attachment symptoms. The yearning, wanting to be with people, I cannot be by myself, or painful loneliness, abandonment, sometimes insecurity, self-pity, you have all of that. So this is what I've been talking about. So all of that with the implicit memories, they don't feel like memories because they're not processed and they feel like me. And that's the strong bond, and that's the one that needs to heal because it's not me, right? Okay. All right. So now we move on to, so if that's our understanding of trauma in the personal, now what is intergenerational trauma? So again, it's the same. It's trauma, but it's passed from a trauma survivor to their descendants. So even, for example, my trauma having been from my ancestors, right? And if we think of here in the Philippines, our collective trauma and what that effect can be. And I post that to my students. What can that effect be? But right away, what? The yearning for whiteness, how it's easy to take on people's abuse or to be abusive to others in terms of like our colonial history, right? Colonialism. Or even I think especially with the trauma of the enduring condition of poverty and where that's coming from, right? Either you fight your way or you just submit and be resigned. Okay. All right. So we have it's both biological and environmental in terms of transmission, and it's how we make sense of the world and act within it, right? Our genetic makeup. And I'll show you how it's transmitted. But so we have the three, which I talked about, and then we'll go through each one in terms of historical trauma, cultural ongoing, and then our family trauma. Okay. So first, our historical trauma. So if you think of it, it's like, so perhaps a little bit of, if we go back in our history, what would be, if you can just blurt it out, right? What were the traumatic events that happened in our nation, in our country? Martial law, the wars, colonialism from almost 400 years with the Spanish, almost 40 years with Americans, almost 4 years with the Japanese. Different. Anything else? Sorry? The climate. The ecological. Yes. Sorry?
Major disasters. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Major disasters.
Oh, yes. And we are the country with the most disasters, because we also have our natural disasters and also man-made disasters. With our disasters, right? All those catastrophes. Okay? So if you think of it, and then you could even name, right? The earthquake in 1990, the Mount Pinatubo eruption, and then if you have our political, Ondoy, Yolanda, right? And if you look at, how about you have our man-made disasters with like martial law, or the massacres, or the drug wars, the killings, all of that, right? So if you think of it, look at it. It's the dominant culture perpetrates mass trauma on a population in what we were talking about. And then you have the affected population showing physical and psychological symptoms. And then you have these responses to trauma. Remember, we were talking about the coping. Those responses of the coping are passed on from one generation to another, and then they in turn display symptoms, right? Sometimes we have people who say, "Oh, no, we won't do this to you." But sometimes what we do is we go to the other extreme, but in the end, we do the same thing, right, to the next generation. Okay, so here we have African Americans in slavery in the US, just in terms of examples, Holocaust survivors, but then you have, for us, extrajudicial killings, massacres, and then indigenous populations. Then you have martial law, or you have all the massacres there too, right? So you see that's very clear, right, in terms of historical trauma. Okay. And then you have the cultural ongoing trauma. So again, with a group that's shared, trauma that's shared by a group. And then it's through discrimination, hate crimes, meanness, right? And here you have, what happens here is you have more of a group, it's cultural wounding and loss, right? And then sometimes you even have responses of shame, self-pity, insecurity, embarrassment. There is already systemic disadvantage. I did a research on people who were born poor and then who stayed poor, and people who were born rich, and people who were born poor and then became rich. People who were born poor and then stayed poor. Did a qualitative study and then compared the two. And truly, if you look at it, you say, okay, the people who are poor are lazy, but actually not, right? It's just that when I looked at the main difference between the two, if it's coping and relying on God and praying and etc., in a sense, the ways of coping or relying on other people, the ways of coping are similar. But what you have more of with the people who became rich, luck, suerte, good, right timing, right, for people to help. Education is a big thing. And then people who married later. They're marrying later than the ones who. So in a sense, marriage becomes then a way of coping to get away from the trauma or to get away from the poverty for the other group. But here it became more deliberate or more intentional. There's more of that, right? So again, of course, education is your key, but then you must need also have other, if you're born poor, then you have other means or resources to finish their education as opposed to the ones who stayed poor, right? So I was just, in terms of, it's almost like in other countries or other cultures, education might be your sure thing, right? For upward mobility. But here in the Philippines, it's like you need a little bit more than that, right? You need a little bit more of the luck or suerte or other things that are, of course, suerte is not just suerte. Suerte is also hard work and timing at the same time, right? And then you have their biological vulnerabilities to disorders and diseases, all right? So that's your cultural ongoing. So if I were to ask you, what would be communities or groups here in the Philippines where you have cultural ongoing trauma? So LGBTQ+, yes, LGBTQ+, sorry? Oh, stigma, mental illnesses, okay, mental health. The poor. Anything else? Indigenous peoples. Okay. All right. Very good. So we see that, right? Okay. And then you have family trauma. I think this one we know very much of, right? But what I would do too is to ask you, I don't know if you do your genogram. Have you done your genograms? Oh, good. So if I were to ask you, perhaps once you do your genogram and then you use your generation, your parents' generation, your grandparents, and if you can, also check on the circumstances of your great-grandparents. Because then that would help us see in terms of like the patterns. Because then it's their, right? It is their time in terms of war, in terms of the atrocities of war also, okay, and then trying to see those, right, in terms of those patterns, okay. And then, so if we were to look at how is trauma transmitted, right? So there is the biological way, and I think if you were to have, if they're to ask you what did you learn from the talk today, you say epigenetics, right? So epigenetics is the study of the effects that environment and behavior have on genes. So in a sense, it's the reading of the genes, right? And it's the one that turns on and off certain genes. So if you were to think of it as ways of coping, if you were this way, there are because of the trauma and how I'm impacted by the trauma, there are certain genes then that is turned off, that falls asleep. And so my way of coping becomes different, right? And so that is epigenetics. And they've seen it's very much in research in terms of the descendants, how the descendants are affected by the trauma responses. Okay, and then they've seen what goes on. So you have sample studies there in terms of the epigenetics. So they do not damage the gene. That would be a genetic change. But they alter how the gene functions. So remember when I said whether there are certain things that are turned on or off, or how it's interpreted. So the genetic itself, there are no genetic changes, but then it's the epigenetic changes, the way it's read.
Okay? And these are the ones that are then transmitted. So that's the biological. Okay? The non-biological, so here you have that our genes can carry memories of trauma experienced by our ancestors and can influence how we react to trauma and stress. If we go back to, if we're the ones experiencing trauma and it's encoded, it's embodied, it's in us, right? So then the way we deal to our offspring, right, that it's carried there and then them to the next. Okay, so you have your epigenetic changes. Here are the non-biological, and I won't go through each one. There's just these are ways of, but this is the most important one. How they are transmitted by dysfunctional family of origin dynamics. A lack of affection, for example, or if it's the hot-temperedness in the family, or the aggression in the family, or the emotional distance in the family, that's how, right? That's a non-biological way. And then it goes to with your unhealthy parenting styles. Okay? So when you have a mother who, let's say, was sexually abused as a child, that their responses or attending to or their attachment towards their own children is the one that's affected, right? If there's that trauma, then it's passed on through dysfunction. That's why sometimes we say, okay, is sexual abuse transmitted? But then you can see that in the genogram. There's sexual abuse, sexual abuse, sexual abuse. Or sometimes even, sadly, suicide. Suicide in this generation, suicide in the next, suicide in the next. But if you look at it, it's not suicide that's transmitted. It's the dynamics, it's the ways, right? The ways by which they are attended to, they are loved, or the lack of love, or the lack of affection, right? So it's the dysfunctional family of origin, right? And then how it's parenting. Because of course, if you've experienced trauma, that's why I say of course, right? If you look at it, then it would be hard to attend and care for and nurture, right, the next generation. It can also be transmitted through negative coping and communication. So like, let's say I talked about earlier with the suicide, right? It's not the suicide that's transmitted, it's the ways of coping. How come suicide becomes an alternative? How come it's an alternative to life? What is it that is lacking? Are they not expressing emotions? Are emotions repressed? Or are they expressing it but nobody's listening? You know, or do they drive themselves to death, you know, in terms of work, pressure, expectations? So what is it that's transmitted from one generation to another? And that would be the negative coping and the ways of communicating. Of course, we do this because we learn them from our families of origin, right? And then our parents learned that from their families of origin. So where is it that we learn alternative ways of coping? Or positive ways of coping? Therapy, very good. Our friends. Any friend you have points out, shows you an alternative way of coping, right? Because they also have other families of origin, right, that they're familiar with. And so with our friends, or with intimate friendships, or even if just friends, what happens is then it opens up other ways or alternative ways other than what you are familiar with, okay? So then they become a bearer, or they instill hope too, right? Okay. And then you have the worldviews. So earlier, also with the coping, is there fight, flight, freeze, submit, attach, right? Which ones are the ones? And then you have also the worldview and hypervigilance. If you grew up with a worldview that, nobody loves me, wala naman nagmamahal sa akin, right? Or if you live with a worldview that the world is a dangerous place, then I would need to cope with it, right? Then it would be difficult to trust. It would be difficult to be vulnerable in relationships, right? Or if you have, wala naman nagmamahal sa akin, if you have that cognition, you will really not attract people, right? Di ba? Walang nagmamahal sa akin, wala na nga talaga. Because, that self-fulfilling prophecy also, right? In terms of that, worldview, and then in terms like the hypervigilance. So here, if you have an example would be people who feel proud of their racial or ethnic identity are then less likely to believe that they deserve to be discriminated against. Of course, if you feel that you deserve happiness, happiness will come to you, right? If you feel that you deserve respect from other people, and with that processing, then it comes to you also, right? But if you do the opposite and you say, oh, I don't deserve to be happy, or ganito na lang ang buhay ko, this is just how life is for me, then it will really just stay that way, right? Because these are energies, no? And so that worldview is how also then intergenerational trauma is transmitted. Okay? So now, how are we doing in time? Okay, all right. Oh, good. So I'll just finish these consequences, and then we'll take a short break, and very, very short break, and then we'll practice, okay? So the consequences of intergenerational trauma, and I think these are all very, you know this already, right? But here is the one that perhaps we don't know. We have a window of tolerance, and that's here, where you have the optimal arousal zone, right? That's why sometimes there's something that happens that makes us feel sad or that makes us feel happy, and then we experience it. We can tolerate it, right? That's this one. But in trauma, this one becomes more narrow. And so when it becomes narrow, then the coping, either we go here in terms of low arousal, it's called hypoarousal, there's just too little energy, we're depressed, we just stay home, we don't want to do anything, there's no initiative, right? Or there's the hyperarousal, where it's excess energy. So in trauma, what happens is when we are traumatized, this one narrows, it's limited. And so we can go like this, because then this is the overwhelming part, right? The overwhelming whoop here too, right? So there's the lethargy here, and then you have the aggression or the more of that there, okay? So what we need to do, so healing then will need to increase the window of tolerance so that you don't go like this, but then you're chill, right? That it's okay. Didn't happen as I planned, but that's fine. You know, this person is this way and they're not going to change. They're not going to change for you. That's fine, because nobody will change for you. They will need to change for themselves, right? But yes, okay? So here to increase that. All right. The physical symptoms, I think we know. So then these are examples of your hyper arousal, and then you have your hypo arousal, right? Lethargy, confusion, fatigue, and then here you have addiction, binging, purging, sleep issues, agitation, GI. It's all physical, right? Okay. So when you're nervous, etc. Okay. And then you have mental health issues. So here's your hypo, isolation, numbness, grief, sadness, guilt. And then you have your hypervigilant, mistrust, impulsivity. Again, right? The loneliness, withdrawal. Okay, because there's energy there, right? Okay. And then you have addiction disorders. And I just put here like certain, it's an example of a study that was done where where it's shown with your indigenous historical trauma with Native Americans and how you see that in their descendants. Okay, substance dependence, depression, alcohol problems. Then I looked for here in the Philippines with the war on drugs. And then I thought, oh my gosh, this is Mira, right, of Reneo? I've seen many, that must be her line of research, a lot of that too. So on children of parents who were killed, and then on people who were exposed to the killings, and then on children or family of those who were killed also. And then also the consequences, right? So the symptoms, right? The danger, the grief, and all of that, okay? Mental distress. Then you have national symptoms, again, here in the Philippines, the victims of the regime, and then of course, very close to PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder, the hypervigilance, the vigilance and everything. You have ecological grief in Filipino youth. So here, among 10 nations, the Philippines has the most youth experiencing ecological grief, emotional and psychological response to losses in nature, right? Especially when you have the typhoons or okay, this is your biggest too. An indicator of intergenerational trauma in terms of with the national symptoms is a lack of healthy public spaces. We don't have that, right? I would just like to brag a little bit. We went to Japan. I was able to bring my family, and I thought, wow, they have parks. You don't have to pay, but you can just enjoy and be in nature and just sit and just relax, but also rejuvenate, right? Renew. And then I thought, wow, we don't have that where we don't have that in the Philippines. So we create that in our social relationships, but we don't have this ecological. So that's very, very clear here. And then you have rituals for collective grieving, disaster memory, and social repair. And this is with the typhoon Yolanda. Walang wala. Gone, everything gone, right? Everything gone. And so you can see also the vulnerability, but of course you have the disaster, you have the typhoon, but at the same time you have the pre-existing conditions, if you might say, the vulnerabilities of the poverty, colonial history, dehumanization, militarization. Okay? And then you have our familial symptoms, our families, which we talked about. I think when I say, oh, wala akong kwentang tao, or sometimes say, I am not enough, or I'm not loved, or hindi ko deserve, I don't deserve to be happy. These are core languages. These are core issues, right? Our schemas, right? And so, with this, Fisher talked about, Volin talked about in 2016, in terms of like the core language in families, either we merged with one parent, we were rejected by a parent, think of it for your own, right? There's a broken early bond with our mother, we're not able to attach. And then we identified with a member of family that's not our parents. Okay, and that can be the root of the trauma. Okay, all right. I think I'll just finish a little bit with the family first. So if I were to perhaps give you 2 minutes, and then while I'm doing this, but just to reflect on, so what are the community trauma or the trauma experienced in the country that affected you? And then, so you have that, and then in terms like your community, where you live, right? And then be able to identify, and this one, especially when you're doing your genogram, right? How it affects you. So these are your perhaps certain things that you don't understand about yourself, personality, impulses, emotions, and needs. Why is it that I have a great need to be recognized? Or why is it that I always have to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and I cannot be by myself, you know? Or why is it that I always compare myself to others, right? So there's impulses. And perhaps to see those that are coming from family or for generations before us, and then the me. To me, right? The effect on me. In terms of relationships, I'm just looking through, I just summarized your genogram, right? So how are the marriages in my family, in my families or previous families, and then what is the nature of relationships? The functioning, separating, how we express affection, or even how we fight through. You know, my parents never fought when we were young. I don't know how they did it, but it's not good because we never see them fight. Sometimes they just don't talk to each other, but we never saw them like, wah, wah. Unlike my in-laws. Like we saw, wah, there's another, wah. My son was 1 year old when we were in the dining table, and then they were fighting over potatoes. How it's being cooked, how it's undercooked, how to peel it. And then my 1 year old stood up and then said, wah, 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 wah. He just mirrored them. But that's the environment, right? So how is it that we are able to fight? How is it that we don't know how to fight because we didn't see? I didn't see it in with my family, and then perhaps also here with our emotions. What are emotions that are familiar to us, or emotions that are comfortable to us, or emotions that are wanted? Those are accepted in our family. And then what are the emotions that we are deprived of, that we have a hard time expressing, that we are so unfamiliar, that we are so uncomfortable, and that we push down because they're unwanted, right? That also we learn from our family, right? And so sometimes what happens is because it's unconscious, we resent those emotions, we push them away, but then, of course, because we're human, they're parts of us, right? And so sometimes we learn that in our relationships, and we learn how it is to. I think the people who are older in the room would know, right? Acceptance and commitment in terms of those emotions, right? And so, but being gracious and graceful about it. But of course, it all again rooted back into our families. Okay, and then how about lifestyle or ways of coping? What are our professions? What are the professions of the people before us? Because those are ways of coping, right? But also, those are ways of expressing ourselves. And so our hobbies or our play or sports or exercise. There was, of course, now that I'm older, then I can say, oh, shucks, this is the reason why I love Zumba. So for me, Zumba is my play and Zumba is my exercise. But if you look at it, Zumba is a way of expressing the body. That's not, and very directly in response to insecurity for having been born poor, for having grown from an alcoholic father, and so then it makes sense. So if you can identify what of these, right? Because very much like trauma being transmitted through epigenetics, our resilience, our ways of coping, our healing is also, we can also see that in people, pockets of people in our generations, right? And so our task is really to discover that and find those for ourselves, okay? Sports, exercise, and then you have the trauma that we were talking about earlier, and then you have the strengths, our windows of tolerance, our social support. I remember we were just we don't have money, we don't, we were hungry, or we would go to school and there's just like a whole mountain of rice, and then there's one longanisa that's hidden and then we were very ashamed when we eat with our classmates, or we would just go home and eat at home because then they wouldn't know what we have. But I remember that I said, oh, we don't have food, or we don't have good food, and we don't have toys. And I have two brothers, Peter and Paul. So Peter was saying that, and we were saying, yeah, that's right. And then Paul said, or perhaps vice versa, they might be angry at me, I don't know, remember who. Then the other one said, it's okay, even if we are poor with clothes or with food or with toys, we are rich with friends, and sometimes that is also the wealth in terms of like you're having your social support, right? And your sense of self. Or the story I remember with my father, I was already in the US and then doing my PhD. Sorry. I was here in Ateneo studying, and then my family is from Baguio. I would my friends would know this. I have a whole loaf of bread, and that would be my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a whole week. One loaf of bread only and cheese whiz. That was my staple. We were very poor. I had a lot of the scholarships, tuition, board, and food, and one meal a day. But then my parents were going to borrow money for me to come to Ateneo because I'm from Baguio. They would borrow money every semester. So the first semester when they did this, I vowed to myself, I will not spend the money that they borrowed, so that the next semester when I go home, I can tell my mama and my papa that I still have money. You don't have to borrow. But then, the one loaf of bread, I just then stayed very thin. I was very, very thin. And then when my father saw me, he was crying. He said, Tes, you're very thin. And then he said, you just don't finish in Ateneo, just come back home. You just study here. And then he said, because, and this is, I thought, very collective, because if you are hungry and you are alone, you are there in Ateneo, then you're hungry alone. But if you are hungry and you're here in Baguio, we're hungry together. Social support. But I thought that's funny. But then you see those pockets of togetherness. But then, I would always remember that. So in terms of that nourishment. Okay. And so here are the reflection questions of those patterns. What are patterns that were stopped by your parents or your grandparents? And then perhaps what are patterns that you yourself are called on to stop, if that's what you want, right? How did they stop these, and for what reasons? And what hurts do you need to let go of, and what want to let go of, right? So it's almost like not just you, but the ancestors, the hurts of your ancestors. What patterns do you want to continue? What patterns do you want to change? What resources do you have now that generations before you did not? So this is just a cause for pause, and we will really have a pause. We will have a 5-minute break, but a pause, because it becomes intergenerational and the transmission is automatic if we do not pause, right? And so this is what we need, because even if you continue, that's okay. You are continuing it, right? But if you see and know it and you want to change, then you'll change that for you. Okay? So we'll have 5 minutes and then we will go in terms of treatment. All right. Thank you. 5 minutes so that you can So we will, especially if you look at it, especially with, so we'll continue, and then we'll go to that part of the treatment. So especially with trauma that's experienced in several generations in our family, right? This, I want to focus now on trying to, now what would it mean, right? What would it mean to let go of that, or what would it mean to heal from those that are one generation from another in terms of where we're coming from? Of course, that also includes our community trauma, national trauma, right? So here is, I don't know if you see, I realize I am not to blame. Right? There's nobody to blame. You cannot blame, or you want if you can, but then there was something wrong with my environment. And now that I uncovered the roots, I can break the cycle, right? So it's really realizing, and there's even though I realize I'm not to blame, that's also realizing the compassion, right? But you can choose, because you can choose, and I think we see those people in our lives. We can choose to be angry, or to blame the people before us, especially our parents, right? Because they're the ones that are immediately close, or we can choose to say that they did the best that they could. Right? And I think especially perhaps coming from having done this with my students in terms of like the looking at patterns and looking at why, or in terms of like the being a descendant, right? And looking at ancestors. I think that's the pause that I was asking for you in terms of being the humbling thing, to be able to have that personal power to now say, okay, I can just stop blaming them and I can let go, right? Like with my father, who was alcoholic, in terms of like realizing he did the best that he could in his circumstances. He was an orphan, he grew up by himself, he didn't know how to be a father, and that was a coping that was accessible then, right? But then, and then we say, but what is it that I want to break, and what is that cycle that I want to change? Or what coping then can help me if that coping was the one that's accessible to them? You know, just a little bit of a story in terms of with just expressing emotions, right? So with my father, what happened then was it was difficult then to express emotions. So he would drink, and then our fear is anger, right? That he would be angry and be yelling. But then of course, he was like bottling up worries, he was bottling up fears, he was bottling even love, you know? So when he stopped drinking, I was an adult already then. And then, of course, it's no surprise, my thesis was on alcoholic families. First, we studied those, right? And I was already in Albany, New York. He would, when he stopped drinking, when he brought me to Ateneo, brought me to the bus station, he would be wearing his sunglasses, because then he would be crying. But see, the tender parts or the emotions are now able to, he could now express. Before it was just all anger, but now, or at least what we're afraid of, but now he could express affection. But here's my evolution. This happened when I was in Albany, New York, and I would call them, right? I'd say, okay, so after the conversation, telephone, and then I would say, I love you, Papa. And then he put the phone down right away. And then the next time he said, I love you, Papa. And then he goes, mm-hmm. Yes, and then he puts the phone down. Then, I love you, Papa. And then he said, thank you. And then he put the phone down. Yes, I love you, Papa. I love you too. And then the last of all, he was the first who said, I love you, Tes. Whoa! But I thought, what I wanted to point out is that learning, it's not just easy to change patterns. It's a choice, an intentional choice to change them. And then the individual, like I said, it's like the perpetual change and letting go. Okay? All right. So here's the I wanted to share this with you, and you can use this with your with your clients. Okay, the autobiography in 5 short chapters. Perhaps you can read the first chapter?
I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out.
I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in this same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out.
I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit, but my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately.
Thank you. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it.
Last chapter.
I walk down another street.
Right. Okay. So just talk about patterns and opening up, right? And change and seeing, right? And seeing and understanding. Okay. So here we cannot change. We cannot change past events. We cannot change the trauma that's experienced by our ancestors. We cannot change the history, even if people are trying to change history in the Philippines very, very effortfully, right? You cannot change what happened. It's the past. It is stable. You cannot change that your mother was unloving towards you. You cannot change that your father was an OFW. Or you can't change that there was infidelity, or you cannot change that your sister is the way she is. We cannot change past events, but we can change implicit memories. Remember, we say we cannot change what happened, but we can change the effect on us. Past is past, the past is stable, and we can change the effect of the past. Okay? So this is the most, I guess, the most hopeful thing I'd like to leave with you. There is always a higher self untouched by trauma. No matter how the adversity or the suffering or the trauma, there's always that part. And capable of becoming a witness when we process it now with and a self-healer. Some people call that higher self God. Some people call that higher self their wise self or their spirit, right? But whatever it is, this I think is the most humbling. There's always that. There's always that higher self, right? Okay. So how is intergenerational trauma treated? So just this is the theoretical part, but so one is the increasing the window of tolerance. Remember, and that what you do is sensory or somatic, DBT. I'll show you why, and then theraplay, right? And then you have trauma therapy, where of course you want to stabilize, you want to establish safety, and then it becomes non-judgmental or collaborative. And these are all the ones there: internal family systems, narrative, ACT. And then you have play therapy, because we all need play. And then the healing and indigenous healing and spiritual, right? Volin would say too, healing from trauma is like creating a poem. You need to have the right timing, the right words, and the right image, right? The timing in terms of readiness, the words, the cognitions that you say, and then the metaphor. All right, so this is the exciting part. So we will, I will explain a little bit of what we will do every time, and then we practice, okay? So here, my symptoms are gateway to understanding and healing, and that is our compassionate self, right? That we're saying, okay, this is the trauma that's happened to me. This is how I cope. this is the symptoms, and now I want to heal myself, right? And where we start is our symptoms. Okay. So what do we do for healing is sensory psychotherapy. So here the point is, because the body sensed the danger and the trauma was affected, now we need to teach our bodies safety. We need to increase the window of tolerance that our bodies experience. Okay? So if you can try this, the hand in the heart, if you can all do this with me, and then in your sessions with your clients, you do this with them. Okay? So put your hand, just that, put your right hand in your heart, and then just feel the energy of you being intimate with yourself. And then I'll be quiet for even just a minute, but if you can tell yourself something compassionate, like a wish or a message to yourself. Okay? All right? Okay, I will be quiet and you do that. Okay. You can slowly open your eyes. Kulang ba? Ang time? But did you feel that assurance, right? For yourself? Okay. So it's just an intimate moment. We are practicing comfort with ourselves, comfort and assuring ourselves that we are safe, right? Okay. Another one is to orient yourself to your environment or to nourishment. So when you go home today and you look into perhaps your room, right? Or your room or your living room or where you mostly are, and then try and look around and identify the things that remind you of nourishment, where your soul is nourished, where your soul is nurtured, where you're okay. Okay? All right? And that is orienting yourself. So that's why it's nice when you put, like, people give you gifts or things that you are memorable to you that you can see. Because whenever you are triggered, that would be the one that would ground you to orient yourself, right? Or if there's a tree that you can see, okay? Another one is to make a boundary. So, if you have, let's say, a mother that is very difficult, or a relative or a friend, for example, where you're feeling you're depleted or you're triggered. Sometimes it's just we're triggered, right? And it would be good to understand why we are triggered by that person, but then create a boundary. Sometimes the boundary can be physical, right? That you can do this, you create something like a pillow or what. Or sometimes it is, it can be like, let's say, we always say that, sometimes you can take people in small doses. So instead, let's say, for example, of seeing them every day, then perhaps you can say, oh, okay, I can see you once a week, or I call you once a week. Instead of you calling me every day, I'll call you once a week. So there is, you're creating that boundary, right? And sometimes that's a way of coping to be protective of yourself, right? Or sometimes sometimes you just need to be physically away. Also, you can do that too. And to, in a sense, for that to be protective. But the point here is that you are intentional, you are doing it, you know why, and you're creating that, okay? All right. Another one, again, sensories is we lengthen our spine. So if you can sit up straight, okay. We'll do this, that you just close your eyes so you're not as conscious, self-conscious, but you just lengthen your spine. So it's almost like sitting up straight, but then opening up your chest. Okay. All right. And then you lengthen your spine. Okay. All right. Okay. So we are feeling confident. We are feeling we're open to the world. And feeling powerful. All right. You can open your eyes. Do you feel that? Right? And then because you compare it if you slouch, right? And then compare to this. So again, it's like your body opening up. Actually, another one which is not here is your Superman pose. That they did in research. You want to do that? Let's do that. So you can stand up, and then your Superman pose, Superwoman pose, Superperson pose, Superwoman. Okay, and then you do. What is right? You put your arms. There, all right. They did that in research where people who were going to go for an interview, before that they did this, that you can do this, you can handle things, right? And then that's your power stance. You're balanced, and you're stable, and you're powerful. All right. Okay, thank you very much. You all look very good. And with that too, it's like your feet are grounded. You're always grounded. Yeah? Your feet are grounded. Okay. All right. And then you have, we have your your breathing exercises. I think these but let's just do it for the sake of. Okay. So again, this is being comfortable in your own body, right? Safe in your own body. Okay. If you can do our caterpillar breathing, the caterpillar breathing? No, perhaps not. Yeah, okay. So this is your caterpillar, and this is your hand. So it's like I'm going to like this. Okay. So use your caterpillar. Your caterpillar is going up with your finger, and you inhale. We're doing that. You hold it at the top. Your caterpillar going down. Exhale. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Okay. And that you can do it because it's not, very discreet. You don't have to, right? Okay. Another one can also just be a big sigh. Just sigh. Right. And sometimes that's all we need too. Okay? But again, comfort with our body, just safety. We're doing sensory psychomotor. Okay? Another one too would be, and this I learned from one of my students, if you can just embrace yourself. There, okay, embrace yourself. And then if you can say, and you can just follow after me, of course. Say, may I be safe. May I be healthy. May I love. May I feel loved. Okay. Continue. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you love, and may you feel loved. May we all be safe. May we all be healthy. May we all love. May we all feel loved. Okay, nice. Thank you. All right. The ocean breathing, we'll just do it 3 times. Ocean breathing is like breathing as like in the ocean, and then you have just the waves of the ocean when you exhale. So you inhale, and then exhale like a wave. Oh, did you hear it? Okay, we do it just 3 times. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Okay, very good. Thank you. And then with the Bani, we do this with children. With the Bani, it's like do 3 times. And then right, like the Bani. Okay. So again, still, right, again. So the point here, I mean, these are all breathing exercises, the bubble, like in the bubble, and then you inhale, and then you smile. It's the same. But again, it's to do it. And it's practice, but again, it's intentionally telling your body that the body is safe and you're okay. Because of course, trauma trained us to be vigilant, and now we're saying that is past. We're okay now, right? Okay. So that's all. And so what happens here is you have, in front of a client, you are the somatic resource. You are the central nervous system. You are the one that is then projects, right, or would help your client who is in distress, right? And so your best preparation for that is to be okay to your own self, right? Your central nervous system is okay, right? And you are in equilibrium. And so in a sense, also being happy, being able to take care of yourself, being happy, being able to let go, right? To do what you preach, right? Okay, and then you're the neurobiological regulator, and then you're a good enough mother. So even for parenting, right? Because we are, especially, our kids are very good that way. They are very good hot buttons for our own issues. And so again, the same thing too, right? The same thing too in terms of being that for them. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be good enough. Okay, all right. So here's your traumatic reaction, because the shaking, the trembling, the numbing, the collapse, and the shame. And so all of these that we do, we say, oh, that's just breathing. It's not just breathing though, right? The deep breathing, the sighs, we are relaxing, we are opening ourselves up to the world. We are feeling confident, we are feeling warmth in ourselves, we are being intimate with ourselves, that you're not alone, you are with you, right? Physical support, grounding, and then all these wonderful things, right? Again, it's the same. It's experiencing that safety in our bodies. Okay? All right. And then we increase clients' mastery or cultivate somatic resources. We expand the capacity to feel safe in the body. We want to do it. That's why it's good if you do it with your clients. It's good like now we're practicing it, because then it then becomes familiar, and then the more you do it, even if it's just 1% better, 10% better, that's fine. We expand the capacity to tolerate states of calm. Because in the past, we were always like so afraid and we were tense, and so being calm or chill or quiet is anxiety provoking. So here we train our bodies. Okay? All right. We cannot choose what we inherit, but can we choose who we become? Can we? Yes, thank you. I had my dissertation advisor, this is long time ago, because I did Bowen Family Systems, and then I said, so how come my results are not significant? The parents do not predict the children's level of maturity, or the parents' problems do not predict the children's level, the children's psychological distress. So I was so angry, and I went to my advisor, and then, because I didn't prove the theory right? And then my advisor said, Tess, but isn't that the most hopeful finding? And I said, that's right. We are not limited by our parents. Maturity levels or no problems, right? We can do us. You can do you, right? Okay. And so here is in terms of like triggers and triggering. Again, still with the body, right? Remember to just be aware. We just know it. We are aware of it. And then we connect. Oh, that's right. This is the self-pity, the insecurities, because I grew up very poor, and then my parents' parents were also poor. So we didn't have a voice. And now I'm taking that voice away from me. You know? So it is that awareness. No judgment, just curious. This is what I got used to doing to help myself. And then to have compassion for the symptoms. Remember, we were saying earlier, to survive, to protect, to self-soothe, to have control, to regulate, to numb, to treat hyper or hyperarousal, right? So when we know we're triggered by this person, and this is why, and this is my coping, when we go through that, then it becomes easier. Okay. Then it becomes easier to let go and then to try something else. And this is my most, this is the sentence that helped me the most. There were a lot of, there's a lot of events of discrimination back in the US. And I've had very terrible coworkers. And this is my mantra. They are going to be them. They are going to be assholes. But you do not want to relapse over them. You do not want to go back to your trauma because of them, right? They're not worth it. Why give them the power? You're the one losing sleep. Why are you giving them the power? You are the one giving them the power. So you are the one who can take it back, right? We don't want that, right? So, and that just happens with the triggers and the triggering, okay? Because they're just triggers, really, right? Or they're, whatever's happening to them. There's nothing wrong with whatever's happening to them, but it's more, and I think this is also a learning, right? To be faithful to yourself first, to your needs, to what you need to learn, right? To be faithful to yourself first. Okay? All right. They're not worth it. Okay. All right. And so here's the one with the higher self. Remember that there's always a self that's untouched by trauma. The wise self, the going on with normal life self. Okay? And these are the 8 C qualities. Curious, clear, compassionate, creative, courageous, calm, confident, and committed. Okay, all right. And then, okay. Then the other one is to repair the damage of the trauma. And this is where your DBT skills will come in, right? Because of that window of tolerance, then you're dysregulated all the time, right? And DBT, there's one of, I should have written it, but it's RAIN, R-A-I-N, especially with emotions. You recognize, you recognize the emotions. A, you accept, okay. I, you investigate. And N, and you non-identify. I am angry. It's okay. I can be angry. There's nothing wrong with me. Even if I have an alcoholic father, I can be angry, right? I investigate why I'm angry, because I was triggered. This person did this to me, and I felt insecure. And N, that is anger. that is not all of me. That is what I'm feeling right now. That is not who I am, right? So it's non-identify, okay? And so again, there's more of that acceptance, right? You have attachment and social engagement, because here we repair it because, of course, the phobia would be the traumatic memories that were not processed, and then that they are parts. There's a part of me that's angry. There's a part of me that is insecure, right? There's a part of me, and so I want to change it. And having the pleasure of having the pleasure. Sometimes people are also afraid of having pleasure, of enjoying. But I think our that's what we learned though from our Gen Zs. They are very good with pleasure. or at least that's what we, or they know what to enjoy, they know what to take delight in. Us, we cannot. We have to suffer first, and then we can enjoy. We have to do our work first, and then we can relax, right? There's all of that Premax principle. Okay, so dialect DBT is very good here with trying to just deal with emotion, because they go away. Right, so, but it's like it's like a ball in water. The more you push the emotions, the more they come out, and then the more they come out at the wrong time. So we just let them be, right? And DBT would help us with letting them be. You have your mindfulness. You have your distress tolerance. It's okay. You're not going to die when you're angry. You're not, you can take this. You have the capacity for it. You have resources for it. You'll be okay. You regulate your emotions, and then you can relate more effectively with others. Okay? This is the summary of it. And then you have here your accepts, right? What do? Do an activity. Call or text a friend, watch a show, be active, do something. And then your altruism, that you're contributing, you're making somebody happy, even whatever small it is, right? And then you compare yourself to those less fortunate than you, compare how you feel now versus time when you're doing worse. In comparisons, I always tell myself, there will always be people better than you, but there will always be people worse than you. So that's okay, right? In terms of your emotions, you want to regulate that also. Get active if you're sad. Look up memories. Look at your photos, right? Look at the times that you have, did something that you're, etc., etc. The hard thing too with sometimes I'd say to my clients, just take a break from social media, because social media is very good with, like Father Johnny Go would say this, you're comparing your inside, you're comparing others' outsides with your inside on Facebook. So that, of course, that is a trigger. Right away there's envy, right away there's, right? In terms of like emotionally regulating, sometimes you just stay away from social media. Just savor and take delight over your own emotions, right? Okay, and then you push things away, push the painful situation out of your mind, that you can do this, right? And then you replace your thoughts, like with the things that you told yourself earlier. And then the sensations, you intensify other sensations. That's why petting your animal. Oh, we went to Japan, and they have a cat cafe. They have dog cafes, and I thought, wow, you don't have to own a dog, you don't have to own it, but then you can go to a place where you can pet the animal, because there's a nurturing thing to this with growing your own vegetables, or growing a plant, or enjoying, watching your plants. So it's like these are things that you could do in terms of regulating. But again, if you just look at it, but then if you see, oh, it's intentionally helping my body heal from the trauma, right? Or my sensations, my senses. Internal family systems, Schwartz is very good with, how are we in time? Oh, 11:30? Oh, okay, we don't have time. All right, but is the parts of. Remember we were talking about coping earlier? So it's parts, like there's a part of me that's angry because I'm trying to protect myself. Or so we just accept them as parts of us. There's a part of me that's trying to escape. There's a part of me that's angry but loves you at the same time. But so you have that. And then it helps with being compassionate over ourselves for our coping. And then it helps us too with opening up with other ways of coping. Okay? But to love those parts of us. To have that culture of compassion with ourselves. We call it self-love, so self-soothing, mindfulness. All right? And then we tell the story to ourselves. Telling the story to ourselves is more important than telling it to someone else. So with this, we are processing it, but we have ourselves now as a witness to ourselves, right? So that healing part. And then transformative witnessing is to when we process the trauma. Okay, and then you have acceptance and commitment therapy, which we know what it is. Sometimes it's just radical acceptance, especially of emotions. That's how we are, right? And then you have narrative therapy in terms of changing the emotions, right? And then learning, searching unique outcomes. So if I were to ask you, and then play, okay? So, and theraplay. Let's just do theraplay. So with the playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, right? Theraplay is doing things that are playful, but that are therapeutic. But then there's emotional regulation to it too. Okay, this is Anne Nurnsburg. Okay, okay, here it is. So I'm known with my students for peanut butter and jelly. It's like you can see the regulation of emotions. Okay, can you all stand up? We will. We're almost done. So this is peanut butter and jelly. I'm peanut butter and you are jelly. Look here, there's safety, regulation, engagement, nurture, or challenge. So this would help with emotional regulation, okay? So I'm peanut butter. You are going to imitate me, but you're going to say jelly. So let's start with something that's benign. But again, you just relax. Okay, peanut butter. Jelly. You are jelly, remember? Okay, but then peanut butter. Jelly. Very good. Peanut butter. Very good. Peanut butter. But you're not going around. Again. Peanut butter. Very good. Peanut butter. Very good. Peanut butter. Peanut butter. Very good. Okay. Thank you. We're emotionally regulating, right? I am, and then you are. So even like with parents or with your clients, right? So it's the same thing, but then it's opening up. It's opening up. It's just not, you're not stuck. You're not stuck, right? Okay. So I think I wanted to just, okay, yeah, you can sit down and then we'll do one more thing. Here, the painful edge of affective negative memories may be dulled by intensification of positive feelings. Just opening up, positive experiencing, right? Searching unique outcomes. So if I'm going to ask you even now, when was the time, or if you can identify a time where it was a sparkling moment for you? Where it was your, what's his name? Wonder, in Wonder, when was your standing ovation moment? What is the award? And if you didn't receive an award, what is the award you're going to want to give to yourself, right? Because you want to create that for yourself. You want to create new positive elements, positive memories, playful, fun and creative practices. You want to do that for yourself, and that is your personal power, right? Okay. So if I were to, I know you might. 1 minute? Shall we do one last activity? Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So I can, again, opening up to the world, right? And because when you play, it's like you're making yourself accessible to grace. There it is. All right. So if you can stand up, this is a childhood song, but I think you're okay with this. I'm not sure about all this live streaming. We're doing all of these things, but it's all right. Okay, it's Jellyfish. You know the song Jellyfish? Okay, I will teach you a new song. You can add in your repertoire. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. All right, very good. Okay. All right. Fists together. Fists. Okay. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. Very good. Hands up. Fists together. Elbows together. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. Very good. You're still not laughing, huh? Hands up, fists together, elbows together, knees together. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. Very good. Hands up, fists together, elbows together, knees together, butt out. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. You just dance like no one's watching. Stand up, fists together, hands together. Yes, fine. They're missing out. They're doing it also. Elbows together, knees together, butt out, head up. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. Okay, last. Hands up. Fists together, elbows together, knees together, butt out, head up, tongue up. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. The jellyfish, the jellyfish, the jellyfish fish. Yay! Now good energies will come to you. All right. Thank you very much. On that note, right, I'd like to thank you for being here. Never forget the jellyfish, but also to be open, to be creative and playful and be open. Thank you. That's our antidote for trauma, intergenerational trauma. The jellyfish.
Thank you so much, Tess. Peanut butter. Peanut butter. Do we have questions, Ariel? Okay. Maybe a couple.
Yeah.
Okay. But we can do anything when we have done the jellyfish. Okay.
There's a nice question, but
Yeah.
I don't know if Tess would be able to answer it, but the other practitioners here might be able to. There's a question about, are there group or community-based interventions for cultural or historical trauma? Maybe do you know of any group? Does that happen in groups or communities? Are you familiar? Or are there here?
Yeah, perhaps they're here, but you know that is wow. That's a wonderful study, a wonderful project. But or I think a lot of nonprofit organizations they do that. But you know, like the mga marites, the groups in organic groups that are together, and then they do a lot of the recalling of things that have happened in the past and trauma. And there's a lot of community gardening that I know. It started here with the community pantries in COVID. You see, it's all very organic. But if we can make that intentional and then even create, but I'm sorry, I don't know if there are. But it's like what we do with our families, right?
I don't know if the others here know of group, no, intervent.
Advocacies, interventions. But like sometimes you see a group of people doing the Tai Chi or the Qigong together, right?
Yeah. Another question from the same person, AJ Songlao is the one asking these questions. He's one of our former graduate students. Hi, AJ. He asks, can we consider the continuous perpetuation of toxic cultures in professional sectors as a form of intergenerational trauma?
Yes, very much so. Because especially remember like the taking of the power, taking away the power, and sometimes the concept of leadership, being, the concept of leadership being not servant leadership, but more so I am up there and you are all under me, but your lives are all much less worthy than I am, right? And so that politics, or even that, so especially I would encourage wherever we are, so wherever we are in terms of leadership, right, that we make choices where one is to understand that using the trauma lens, but at the same time also, right, trying to engender where it's shared leadership, shared governance, and power, and genuineness, authenticity, like the power of love for the truth, as opposed to bending or manipulating the truth.
Thanks,
But
Tess.
yes, it is, because it's like it's trickled down, and from the colonialism of the past too. So.
How about from this group on site? Are there burning questions, Papo?
So Tess, thank you again for the wonderful lecture. So this is a question from my clinical work. I've always wondered if intense ventilation of the original traumatic pain, is it a necessary step? So you know what I'm trying to say. Traditionally that seems to be what we have learned, no, na you allow the client to ventilate, in psychoanalytic terms, abreaction, right? So I'm just wondering though, because like your last slide here emphasizes intensification of positive feelings rather than re-experiencing the original pain.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, is it really necessary? I know some sort of re-experiencing is needed, no?
That's right.
To train the clients to increase the window of tolerance.
Yes.
Pero yung test, yun yung tanong ko, di ba? Yung, kailangan ba na gumapang sa sakit ng loob yung client mo in front of you to help him heal? Yes. I'd imagine kasi I'm thinking, there are a number of times na in our sessions, there were clients who didn't have to go through that.
That's right.
But some, they had to.
Yes.
But I was thinking, always in my work, should I have allowed that to happen? Or was it also, can healing happen without that intense ventilation?
That's right.
Yun, sa experience mo, I don't know, or what research says about that.
Yes, yes. All right. So with trauma research, what they're saying is, this is how, in a sense, this is how, but this is how. Remember when we talked about ourselves being our transformative witness and the healing within. It again, my answer is it depends. You have people who would need to go and who would need to process it. There's no requirement for it to be intense, because the requirement really is to be the transformative witness. Like, so to go through it, to go slowly, to talk about it, but in their pace and in their time, but also in their own safety. Because then they go through it, they're not consumed by it anymore. When they process it, they're not consumed, because then they can be safe with their own. They've already established safety in themselves, in their bodies. So it's less triggering. But the power is to be able to be witness to their own emotion. To their own experience. So even their emotions, right? Some people need a catharsis and then they process. But the other thing that I think in my experience is some people re-experience the trauma. They by talking about it, they're re-traumatizing themselves. It's not anymore just catharsis. It's not just processing, but then sometimes they stay there. And then that's the difficulty when I talked earlier that they can be loyal to their symptoms. This is how they survive. They cannot let go of it. That's the only way to live. And then it's re-traumatizing. Yeah. The nice thing is that's why we're doing like the jellyfish, and the nice thing is whenever we are indulged in anything that's mindful, whether we're just watching the trees or the wind, that's where your brain is. That experience is where your brain is. The brain cannot decipher if this happened long time ago. So if we keep talking about the trauma, we are experiencing it in the now. Right? This, in a sense, like with narrative therapy, the stories that we tell are the ones that shape us. So they are the reality of the now. But if we create our positive experiences that happened before, this is who we are now. Then there's more of that healing, right? So even like with the virtual reality, that's what our brain is saying. Then that's where we are. We're breathing. We're relaxing.
So catharsis is not necessary.
Oh, not necessarily. That's true. Not all the time. Some people are okay with.
Like your dad, from the abruptly, hurriedly putting down the phone.
Yes.
Said, I love you.
Yes.
To that point that, I love you, Tes.
Yes.
How many years was that?
Ah.
And through that, at any point there, I
Yes.
assume he was healed from his trauma to a certain degree.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, did he had any catharsis through the years? Baka I assume wala. He found his
Yeah. Some people, we all heal. That's a nice thing. We're all different and we all heal differently.
So it's not necessary.
Not necessary.
So no less pressure for us therapists. So
Yes. That's right. Our job is to be that emotional regulator, right? That we are there for them, right? Yes. Okay, thank you. And the availability. All right. Okay.
That's it. Thank you so much, Tes. And as a token of our appreciation, we want to gift you with 2 books that are co-created by our colleagues in the Department of Psychology and also our graduate students. So one book is entitled Leadership with Father Ben. And these are all the young Ateneans who were mentored by Father Ben and who went on to be really forces for good and inspiration in their own communities. So, and the other one? Yes, absolutely. Very great stories. And they were co-written with our graduate students. And the other is a publication from the Ateneo Center for Organization Research and Development, which is led by Dr. Joy Calleja. This is Workplace Wellbeing in the Philippines, a guidebook edited by Dr. Tony Mactal, Dr. Errol Ilac, and Dr. Feliz Caringalbo of Psychology and Ateneo Cord. So we hope you enjoy these books. Thank you very much, Tes. Thank you everyone for coming, and also to the 179 viewers online. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a good weekend.